Okay, folks, so welcome to the Native Trout Recovery Program session. This is our final webinar of our 2022-23 Sport Fishing Regulations Engagement. So thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Catherine Medinsky, and I'll be facilitating the session tonight. So to start off, I'd just like to acknowledge that we are gathering today online from the traditional homeland of many Indigenous people, including those from Treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, and the Métis Nation of Alberta. I'm joining you today from Treaty 7 territory. Indigenous peoples have long been stewards of these lands and of the resources that the land provides. I want to make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. Since we're coming together today from the traditional territories and homelands of many Indigenous peoples, please take a moment to just personally consider the lands that you work and live on and your place in the treaties. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over the agenda for today. So we will be hearing from Nicole Pilgrim about the Native Trout Recovery Program. She'll be giving us an update on that. And then we're going to get into a question and answer period. And then we'll bring the meeting to a close right at around 8:30 tonight. So first, before we get started, if you would like to turn on closed captions for this session, you are welcome to do so. There should be a black bar at the bottom of your screen. It might be in different places depending on if you're joining from a tablet or a cell phone, but just look for that closed captions button and you can select if you would like to listen or read the captions in a variety of different languages. So at the end of the session, we are going to have a question and answer period where we will be joined by a series of panelists, and they will be able to answer your questions about native trout tonight. So I see that some of you have actually already found that question and answer. You should see it again on that black bar at the bottom of your screen, or possibly on the right-hand side if you're on a tablet. So to open it, just click that button, and then you'll be able to submit your questions here. We'll also be using the upvoting feature as a way to sort the questions. So we anticipate that there will be quite a few questions tonight, so we'll be looking at the most popular questions. So if there's something that comes up that you're really interested in, you're welcome to upvote it, and then you can sort those questions by the most upvoted. So we'll try to get through as many questions as we can tonight, but it's possible that we won't get through all of them, and we might be grouping some of the questions together too. So on that note, if there are any inappropriate questions that come in, we will be dismissing them or deleting them. So I'm sure that's not going to be a problem for us tonight, but just to stay aware. We will be grouping like questions together, and we'll start actually by answering some of the pre-submitted questions that folks sent in when they first registered for this webinar. If your question isn't answered tonight, we will be going over a few other opportunities for you to send in questions, like our Ask the Expert. So we'll be going over that at the end of the session. So in addition to Nicole, we'll also be hearing from a few different panel members. So we will have Jessica, Andreas, Mike, Ryan, and Kelly, who will be joining us for the question and answer session at the end. In the background, behind the scenes, you'll also notice my two colleagues. There's Janine and Natalie. So they're just helping to provide the technical support for this session, so making sure things are running as seamlessly as possible behind the scenes. And with that, I will turn it over to Nicole to walk us through the session.
Great, thank you so much, Catherine. So I want to thank everyone for attending this evening. Really excited to give you some updates on our Native Trout Recovery Program and tell you what we've been doing in the last year. And one thing that we're going to be doing here is starting off with some polls this evening. So we would like to get an idea of who our audience is, and hopefully that will allow us to tailor some of our information and our answers for you. So we'll get going with one of those right away. And Catherine, if you don't mind bringing that up, we'll get the audience to fill out our poll questions.
Awesome. So folks should see the poll on their screen now. And you'll notice that our slideshow in the background also has those poll questions. And that's just because in our recording, people won't be able to see the poll pop up on their screens. But yes, as Nicole mentioned, yeah, wondering where folks are coming from today and really wondering what folks are interested in and what's drawing them to this webinar. So we'll give folks just a few more seconds here to answer that. I see lots of the results are coming in. Again, you might need to just look for the poll option if you're joining us from a mobile device, but hopefully it's popping up on your screen. Okay, so we've got quite a few results still just trickling in there. So thanks all for doing that. Awesome. Okay, and just another few seconds here. Great, and you should see the results pop up on your screen as well. If you're watching the recording, you won't see those results pop up, but it looks like we have quite a few people joining us from the Calgary area and Southern Alberta. We've got a pretty good split across the province here. So thanks everyone for joining us from all across the province. And then in terms of the topics that people are interested in related to native trout, it looks like lots of folks are interested in the protection of species at risk and the environment, as well as stream restoration projects in native trout habitats and fishing for native trout. So thanks everybody for doing that. And I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, those are really great interesting answers, and I'm really excited to tell you about our native trout projects and answer some of your questions here today. So I'll just move on to our next slide here. So I'll give you a quick agenda of what the presentation is going to be about today so that you have an idea of what I'll be covering and the types of things that we'll be able to answer questions about in our question and answer period following this presentation. So I'm going to go over a little bit about our native trout and what their threats are, our Native Trout Recovery Program actions that we've been working on in the last year specifically. I'll talk a little bit about our Native Trout Collaborative and who's involved in that and who's funding that. And then I'll wrap it all up in a bit of a summary. Okay, so let's get into it. Who are the native trout and what is causing their decline? So when I'm referring to our Alberta native trout during this presentation, the species that I'm talking about are Athabasca rainbow trout. So the drawing at the top there, bull trout in the middle, and West Slope cutthroat trout at the bottom. And these species have existed in Alberta for thousands of years and are native to our landscape. However, we are seeing a significant decline in their populations, and so this has led to them being listed as a species at risk, both under Alberta's Wildlife Act and Canada's Species at Risk Act. And so their listings are shown in the table on screen here. The provincial listing is threatened for all three species, and the federal listings range from endangered to Athabasca rainbow trout, threatened for the Saskatchewan Nelson populations of bull trout, and all of the West Slope cutthroat trout, and then the Arctic populations are listed as special concern. So a little bit of a historical perspective here. Many of us only know our native trout, including myself, as these low population numbers and as a species at risk. But the Alberta archives are actually full of these amazing photos showing these huge fish that have been harvested and collected from our landscape as something that was quite normal, and they were quite abundant back then. And they even thought bull trout were once considered a junk fish, and people were advocating for the removal. And we've come in a completely different direction now, where bull trout are actually Alberta's provincial fish. So why have our native trout populations dropped so low? If you've tuned in before, you may have heard of us categorize their threats as 3 H's: habitat, harvest, and hybridization. But habitat, overfishing, and non-native species is a little more accurate to describe that. So habitat refers to anything that causes destruction or fragmentation. Overfishing refers to mortality caused by poaching and incidental mortality from catch and release angling. Non-native species refers to hybridization, competition, and invasive species. And then we can further break down these categories into many stressors, and most, if not all, of our native trout populations in Alberta are under threat from multiple stressors. This is called a cumulative effects issue, and so this is really describing the combined effects from past and present human activities. And the representation of a cumulative effects for our native trout species is pictured on the right of this slide. In order to be effective in native trout recovery, we have to mitigate or eliminate the cumulative impact of threats to sea recovery. And only working to resolve 1 or 2 threats may not actually result in a noticeable change. So let's go to another poll. Catherine, if you can pull that up for us, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Okay, so folks should see this next poll on their screen. So we're wondering, in what way can you help us to address the different threats to native trout? And as folks are answering this question, so go ahead when you have a chance, you can select more than one option here too. And I'd encourage people to think about the actions that they can take themselves too to help protect our native trout. Thanks everybody for answering that. We've got lots of results trickling in here. Great. Okay, so we'll just give another couple of seconds here and then I'll end that poll and share the results. Okay, so lots of people are interested in reading and being informed on the native trout threats and adjusting their angling behavior to help protect the fish, as well as advocating, for native trout recovery through social media and other means. So thanks for everyone for answering that. And back over to you, Nicole.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Yeah, that's really exciting to hear, and we really appreciate everyone doing their part to help us with native trout recovery. So that's great to see. Okay, so I'm going to get into our native trout recovery program and the actions that we've been taking in the last year, and I'm going to focus on kind of some of the bigger recovery actions and talk about that. And the ultimate goal of our recovery program is to have more native trout, bigger native trout, and more native trout in more places, ultimately. So I'm going to start off talking about our recovery action plan that we are working on. So this recovery plan is working to include all 3 native trout species so that we have a consistent approach for all 3 native trout. We're working a lot on doing a cumulative effects modeling for Athabasca rainbow trout and West Slope cutthroat trout, and to update the bull trout cumulative effects model to give us the best hypothesis on what each population in watersheds across the eastern slopes are facing. We're also doing some recovery scenario modeling. So this will help us better understand what recovery actions and where could produce the best results, meaning the most measurable change in recovery. And then this will help us lead us to better be able to prioritize where and how we work on native trout recovery. We've also been doing a lot of genetic analysis. So it's really important that we understand the location of peer populations and understand where hybridization is a threat. We really want to know what's going on genetically with our populations so that we can protect our native trout genes to preserve local adaptation and genetic variation. And we really see this as the foundation for future recovery actions. We don't want to be stocking fish or moving fish with inappropriate genes because this could lead to issues such as inbreeding or the inability to adapt to conditions outside of their home stream. And that could lead to the death of those fish that we moved, which is really a complete waste. So we don't necessarily have all of these genetic expertise in-house. So we've been reaching out to experts to help us, and this has led to a multi-year contract with the University of Montana with their renowned trout genetics lab, and we've really been benefiting from all their experience and their work in Montana with trout recovery and their in-depth expertise. We also have grants out to Canadian universities for researchers and students to analyze our genetics data and help us to better understand our native trout populations and implement recovery management actions. We're also working on recovery stocking. So recovery stocking is a tool that we can use to increase populations by addressing hybridization concerns, expanding the habitat range of our native fish into streams that have suitable habitat and are currently fishless, or we can even use it to reintroduce fish into places that have been extirpated from other threats, if those have been addressed. It works well in some situations, but not all, depending on what the available habitat is, or if the stocked fish can adapt to the new environment. So it's really important to understand this isn't the solution to all native trout issues. So we really have to consider the economic costs, ecological risks, and benefits of recovery stocking on a case-by-case basis. We are currently working on some recovery stocking methods for West Slope cutthroat trout, and they both involve starting with collecting the ripe males and females during spawning in the spring. And we were actually able to get an ultrasound machine to help us check the fish to get a better idea if they were ripe and how many males and females that we have. And that's pictured in the big photo in the center of the screen there. So that's been really great to have that technology because we really need to have a similar ratio of males and females to get our genetic crosses that we need. So basically we collect the gametes from the fish in several different locations and mix them together, again, to increase that genetic diversity. And we try and work in crosses by doing them by a 3x3 crosses. So that photo on the top right of your slide is us kind of mixing them together to create that genetic diversity. Now, most of the fertilized gametes are part of our composite broodstock, which we first started in 2021, and we did a second collection of the gametes last year. And the young are being raised at the Allison Brood Station, which they will continue to be there for 3 to 4 years until they're ready to reproduce. And then their offspring will then be stocked out in appropriate locations to increase our wild West Slope cutthroat trout populations. The second method we're using for West Slope cutthroat trout is remote site incubation, or RSI. And we're using this currently to put West Slope cutthroat trout in a fishless stream above a above a waterfall right now. So again, after we collect the eggs and milt and cross them, the fertilized eggs are then taken to a quarantine trailer at Allison Brood Station. And when they reached the eyed stage, so basically you can see kind of the black dots of the eyes visible in the eggs, they are then placed in an incubation unit, so pictured on the right center of the screen. And that incubation unit has a bunch of little plastic pieces in there that act as kind of artificial gravel, as like a red in stream. And then there's a pipe that goes in and out of the unit so that there's continuous flow of oxygenated water. We're also very excited to expand our recovery stocking project with the additional space that we're developing at the Allison Brood Station and the Raven Station. Right now, the Allison building is being built, so that's the bottom photo there. It will be a quarantine facility, specifically to increase capacity for the West Slope cutthroat trout recovery stocking project. And that should be up and running later this year. We're really excited about that. And then we also have the Raven Station, so that won't be up and running until 2026, the additional space there. But we do already know that we're going to have a specific area dedicated to raising a species at risk for recovery stocking in that station. So that will be great to have that extra capacity. We don't quite know what species we want to put in there right now. We're still working on what would be best suited for our future recovery actions, but we still have a few years left to do that. Now I'm going to move into some of the habitat restoration projects that's going on. So we are undertaking habitat assessments, and so these are to identify key habitat-related threats such as sediment sources, physical habitat alterations, fragmentation and degradation, or if there's impaired riparian areas. And we're using these assessments to create prioritized inventories of sites with the appropriate remediation options. So that will help us understand where we can work into the future. Some examples of the habitat remediation projects going on. So the first one I have is Rocky and Fall Creek. So you may have heard about this project. Both these streams had undesignated off-highway vehicle trails running along them and through the riparian area. And these undesignated trails were contributing a large amount of sediment into important bull trout habitat, including spawning habitat. Reclamation was completed in 2017 and 2018, and this included 31 ford crossings of Rocky Creek, which were reclaimed, and 46 crossings on Fall Creek. 2022 was year 5 out of 5 for monitoring, and our monitoring data is showing that the mature and immature bull trout numbers in these streams have increased since the reclamation work took place, which is really exciting to see and really happy to see that. And we do have our colleagues that are writing this up as a scientific paper and hoping to publish these results, so stay tuned for that. A few other habitat restoration projects to talk about today. The first one is the Mackenzie Creek Trail Project. So this project is working to move the existing trail away from the creek and reduce the number of crossings to reduce that impact to native trout in the watershed. It's an ongoing project with Trout Unlimited Canada, West Fraser, and Repsol as partners. And they've currently completed phase 1, which included 15 kilometers of newly constructed trail, the remediation of 12 crossings, and installation of 4 bridges. And they're currently planning phase 2, which would include 34 kilometers of additional trail, 18 additional crossings to be remediated, and the installation of 9 more bridges. So that's a really exciting area. It should be a great trail system once that's fully complete. We also have the Watercourse Crossing program. So the Watercourse Crossing program has a purpose to address threats to native trout survival stemming from trails and roadway crossings that cause habitat fragmentation, erosion, and sedimentation. The program works with private industry, municipalities, Alberta transportation, trail managers, and rail lines to remediate crossings. And most crossing owners have inspected all of their high-risk crossings so far and are continuing with the remaining sites with an average inspection rate of 80% per owner, which is really exciting. Remediation of the crossings has already started and there's more scheduled for the upcoming years. With that, let's go to another poll. Catherine, if you can pull that up.
Great. Okay, so folks should see this poll pop up on their screen and go ahead and answer our question around which native trout actions do you want to hear more about? So as many of you know, we do have a few different ways of getting information out, including our My Wild Alberta Facebook page. So if you don't follow us there, please do so. We've got lots of responses coming in here. So thanks everybody for participating in these polls. So we'll give folks just a couple more seconds here. Okay. So it looks like people are really interested in hearing more about the habitat restoration projects as well as the recovery action plan, and pretty interested in really hearing about all of these different topics, so including recovery stocking and the Watercourse Crossing program and genetics. So thanks for that, everybody, and I'll turn it back over to you, Nicole.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's great. We'll continue to put out more information. If you guys like hearing about it, then we're happy to provide you with updates. And like Catherine said, keep an eye on the My Wild Alberta Facebook. We like to put out posts on that on the projects that we're doing for our Native Trout Recovery Program. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about our Native Trout Collaborative. So as you've probably seen, that there is extensive recovery work going on across the East Slopes, and we would not be able to do this work without the tremendous effort from our partners. We have a collaborative that we've created that we work closely with our partners, shown on the screen here, to implement recovery projects on the ground and bring awareness to our native trout and the issues they face. I also really want to acknowledge the funding for this collaborative and for the work that we're doing with our partners from DFO through their Canada Nature Fund for Aquatic Species at Risk. We're currently just finishing up a 4-year agreement with them where they provided over $6 million in funding for native trout recovery. And we've actually been successful applicants in another 3-year agreement for $1.89 million dedicated to native trout recovery. So that's been a huge support for us to really get this work going and working with our partners, and we're very grateful. And a sub-team within our Native Trout Collaborative is the Native Trout Communication Group, and this group really recognizes the importance of increasing the prominence of native trout to Albertans and educating everyone about how they can do better to protect native trout. So we have this special group really focusing on this task. And the Communication Collaborative has developed a great website called albertanativetrout.com that has all kinds of resources like videos and blogs that will tell you all about our native trout species. We've also developed great stickers, postcards, banners, and brochures, which have been actually very popular, which we're really excited about. And you may have seen some of these at outreach events or even at your local outdoor retailer. There's many more things to come from this group, so stay tuned to any of the collaborative members' social media for continued updates. All right, and we're heading, I think this is our last poll of the evening, Catherine.
Awesome. Okay. Yes. So folks should see that last poll up on their screens now. And we're wondering if you have heard about the Native Trout Collaborative and if you've been over to albertanativetrout.com. So we're really wondering, yeah, if you've just had the opportunity to check out this website, or if you've met with a team member at some sort of event. And if you haven't checked out the website, I really encourage you to do so. There's lots of great information on there. Okay, so I'll end the poll here and you should see the results pop up. So, I mean, a pretty even split here. So most folks haven't heard about the Native Trout Collaborative. So excited that we got the opportunity to share that information with you today. And yeah, lots of folks are going to go check out the website as well. So thanks very much for that information.
All right, great, thanks. Yeah, really encourage you to go check out that website. If you want to be part of the Native Trout Collaborative or get involved, that's also a great place to start as well. Okay, on to the summary here. So Athabasca rainbow trout, bull trout, and West Slope cutthroat trout are under threat, and they face cumulative effects. And in order to have successful recovery, we have to address the cumulative effects that are acting on these species in their watershed. The Native Trout Recovery Program is taking many different actions. I only covered some of the bigger ones today, but there's a lot of different recovery actions and lots of groups that are working in the East Slopes to take on recovery projects and programs. We work with many different partner organizations. I only showed the ones that were a part of our collaborative, but we know that there's lots of other partner organizations out there that we talk to all the time that are working on our native trout recovery. We appreciate all the work that they're doing and the information that they can provide us working on the ground out there. With that, if you want to get more involved, one thing that you can do is go to that albertanativetrout.com website, and there's an email address that you can contact there to be involved with the collaborative. And there's lots of volunteer opportunities and different things coming up. So that's a great place to start there if you want to get more involved in native trout recovery. And with that, I guess we're going into our question and answer period here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Nicole. And yes, moving over into our question and answer session now. So I see that the Q&A has been really active this evening. So excited that we'll have the opportunity to get to lots of those questions. Just a reminder that you should see that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And remember that you can also upvote the different questions that you want to see answered tonight. So definitely use those upvoting, that upvoting functionality. So to get us started here, we are going to kick things off with some of the pre-submitted questions. And as the presentation has been going on, there have been a few additional questions come in on the same topic, so we'll be lumping those all together. So David was wondering, has the province considered a single barbless hook regulation on native trout streams? Glenn was also wondering, why not ban treble hooks like other provinces and the Yukon? And then during the session today, Ken was also wondering, implementing a barbless hook regulation would go a long way to help the recovery of this fish species. Why do fisher persons have to use barbed, trebled hooks? Example, replicas, sorry for my pronunciation, to catch fish. Think what these types of hooks are doing on to our fish species. And then Grant was also wondering, other jurisdictions have fly fishing only regulations on water bodies. Why does Alberta not use that sort of regulation?
Hi, Catherine. I can answer this one. And hi, everyone. Thanks very much for listening in tonight. My name is Jessica, and I'm the Provincial Recovery Specialist for Fish Species at Risk. And I'm really glad to hear your questions around barbless hooks and different kinds of gear. And really, if you've been able to tune into our engagement sessions in the past couple years, you've probably realized that this is quite a hot topic. So we've definitely heard you. And since our in-person engagement sessions a couple of years ago, we've been working hand in hand with our federal counterparts to update the federal legislation that would give Alberta the authority to do gear changes. These conversations have taken maybe a little bit longer than some of us would hope, but I'm really glad to report in that the finish line is near. And then once that amendment has been made, then we can really start talking about options in terms of gear that will help us meet our fisheries management objectives, which might include recovery, but also help us meet angler satisfaction. One of the questions was about barbless hooks, and just to kind of make sure and remind folks listening in today, there isn't strong evidence that moving to barbless hooks alone would result in the recovery of a threatened trout population. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't implement something like that. There are other reasons we implement regulations that have more to do with angler satisfaction. And again, once we can start really making these gear changes, of course, we would reach out to Alberta anglers and get your input on what makes sense in different watersheds. And I'm really encouraged to see all these questions about different gear changes, because really what that tells us is that many of you are already thinking about solutions around recovering native trout, and it'll become even more and more important as Alberta rivers become busier. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And we have another set of pre-submitted questions here that have come in about stocking. So Kyle was wondering, what are the negative effects from stocking trout on wild species and reproduction issues? And then Brandon was also wondering, will the stocking result in removal of certain species from waters that they are currently stocked in?
Hi, excuse me. Hi, my name is Andrea. I'm the senior fish bio down in the Crow's Nest Pass, and I'll take this as an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we do for stocking or plan for doing for stocking of native trout on and West Sub cutthroat trout and other species at risk. So negative effects for trout stocking on top of wild species is a bit of a concern when we're thinking about if there's a native species still left, if there's a natural population still left, we don't want to have a different genetic lineage going into that population, or even have an already adapted species suppressed by a stocked species, which is always a risk. We use recovery stocking we can use recovery stocking for different opportunities, for example, population enhancement, replacing of non-natives, and contravening things like extreme hybridization. So we have methodologies to do that. Nicole showed the possibilities that we have for that, and we would not do that on natural populations where we can enhance them by means of habitat recovery or other processes. Will the stocking result in removal of certain species from watersheds they currently are located in? I assume this would be things that you've heard about, something like mechanical removal or the use of chemicals to remove non-native fish species. Alberta is learning about what we can do with those methodologies, and we've learned a bit from what Banff has been doing in their jurisdictions on that process. And we're looking into what we can do and where we could use that in the future. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Andreas. And we have one more set of pre-submitted questions here. So Mark is wondering, what is being done to mitigate snowpack contamination from coal mines on the eastern slopes? And then Will was also wondering, what does the province's assessment of coal mine drift onto snow indicate with respect to potential impact on native trout?
Thanks, Catherine. I would like to take this question. Thanks for the questions, Mark and Will. I think what you might be referring to is some new research that was initiated by Alberta Environment and Protected Areas at Window Mountain Lake, located on Alberta's southeastern slopes. And it's showing that fugitive dust is being carried across the Continental Divide and deposited in the lake. And based on multiple lines of evidence, the likely source of fugitive dust is from coal mining operations in BC. Findings from the government's initial study on this issue are detailed in a 2022 report entitled Transboundary Atmospheric Pollution from Mountaintop Coal Mining, which was published in the scientific journal Environmental Science and Technology Letters, and it remains publicly available. While concerning, these results show that Alberta's environmental monitoring program is providing the information needed to report on the condition of our environment, and in turn inform policy development and responsible resource management. What does that mean for native trout recovery, however? It's too early for us to tell, so I don't have a really great answer besides providing you with a little bit of that background information to provide to you, but we are aware of it and we'll be keeping that in mind relative to our native trout recovery program. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And would you mind just introducing yourself as well?
Thank you, Catherine. My name is Kelly Williams and I'm a status and recovery manager on the Species at Risk team.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Okay, so now we are jumping right into the live questions here. So Frank is wondering, will there be any additional sessions to talk about native grayling populations and any associated conservation activities or recovery efforts?
Yeah, I could take this one. That's an excellent question, Frank. Mike Blackburn here, fisheries biologist out of Edson. So with regards to more sessions, I believe this is our last session. We don't have a specific session for Arctic grayling. However, Arctic grayling are self-wanted, similar to like all our trout species. So we treat them the same as native trout. So this is the venue to ask your Arctic grayling questions. So specifically, we're talking about a species of special concern here. So as you know, it's catch and release across the province. And the major threats for Arctic grayling are the same as what we see for bull trout, for west slope cutthroats, for Athabasca rainbows. So things like fragmentation and sedimentation. So as Nicole kind of give us a insight into the Watercourse Road Crossing inventory and remediation program is one of the major things that we're doing with regards to Arctic grayling, specifically in the east slopes where Arctic grayling live. It's I think number 1 and 2, the two of the highest priority watersheds where we're working on any kind of road stream crossings or sedimentation are actually in the Burland and Wild Hay. And so we have a pretty concerted effort there. And also we do ongoing watershed monitoring, so standardized watershed assessments, measuring relative abundance and things like that. We are working right now on a kind of an experimental stream closure in the Pembina River, and we're getting positive results from that and ongoing monitoring with that. And that's pretty much off the tip of my tongue what I know for ongoing stuff. We haven't laid out our work plans for the upcoming season, but if anyone else has anything they want to add on Arctic grayling research or ongoing work, please feel free.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so we have another question here that's come in from Randy. And Randy is wondering, will we be touching on the Raven River issue with the proposal of the gravel pit, again threatening this most important native trout river fisheries? What are the views of environment and protected areas?
Hi there, Randy. I'd love to take this. And I'm having a little bit of noise in here, but yes, so the Raven River fishery actually doesn't contain native trout anymore, unfortunately. It once was a a bull trout fishery, but unfortunately it has been functionally extirpated. Now, like again, as I mentioned, it's a very popular brown trout fishery. And so it's a bit outside the scope of this webinar. So what I'd recommend doing is just reaching out to our outreach services team, and they'll connect you with the right Water Act approvals leads so you can get the most up-to-date information on gravel pit applications in that watershed.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, we have a question here about invasive species. So invasive species, what, DJ submitted this, sorry. And DJ is wondering what is being done on the ground to remove these species?
Hi, DJ. Kelly here again. I'd like to take this question. So we did have, the policy group did do their session. I can't remember exactly which date. It was a few nights ago. And there was a really great section in there on invasive species. So I would encourage you to look that up, and you can even scroll to the part about invasive species, I think, and lots of good information in there. In terms of, we don't have anyone here available to address that tonight, but if you do have a specific question, you could maybe submit it to the Ask the Expert if the YouTube video doesn't answer your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And we can put that link in the chat there to the Ask the Expert. Okay, Justin is wondering, are there any updates on the upper Pembina River and tributaries? Has the fishing closure been showing any results?
I can answer this for sure. Mike Blackburn again here in Edson. The Pembina River, this is in my area. I'm intimately involved in the Pembina River closure. So with regards to updates, we haven't done any specific fish sampling last year. However, in 2021, so yeah, last year, we did an Upper Pembina River education session, and it can be found online on YouTube if you want to go in and see the specific details and graphs and such. But currently, the trends are quite positive regarding fish recovery, at least what we're seeing in the interim, as these are interim results. So it suggests that the recovery efforts appear to be contributing to fish population improvements. We're seeing improvements in Arctic grayling. We're seeing improvements in mountain whitefish. We're even seeing a little bit of improvement in the bull trout. Some caution has to be put in this as their interim results. And we're working with few fish right now. But all in all, everything seems to be moving in a positive direction. The plan is to go out and collect data again this year and monitor this closure, and with hopes that things keep trending in the right direction. Thanks for the question.
All right, thank you, Mike. Okay, so we had a question also come in here from Jordan, and Jordan wants to know, he says, hello everyone, curious how the bull trout pit tagging went on the Tay River in September, and did it go well? And I'm hoping that someone can also just tell us about what pit means.
Hi, Catherine, it's Jessica, and Jordan, thanks so much for your question. I was really lucky. I was one of the biologists that got to be out on the Tay River a couple of years ago when we caught our first big migratory bull trout in our trap to pit tag. So pit tags are little magnetic devices that we insert into fish, and they basically anytime the tag moves over two wires, it causes a bit of an electrical current, and we can pick that up, and then we know that fish has moved past a certain point in the watershed. So it's a really nice, relatively low impact way to get a lot of information about fish movement. So a couple of years ago, we were able to pit tag 9 migratory bull trout coming in from the Clearwater to the Tay. And by we, I mean the Alberta government, but also our partners, Trout Unlimited Canada. So since that pit tagging event happened a couple of years ago, Trout Unlimited has really been taking the lead in maintaining and installing the stationary arrays, which are the actual units that are put on the landscape to pick up the passing fish. So I know this year, Trout Unlimited deployed 4 stationary rays across the watershed. I'm not quite sure if they were able to detect those bull trout again. They are also really busy in the watershed looking at habitat remediation activities. And likely in the near future, we'll be getting together with TU and kind of charting a course forward on what further actions will look like for the TAY.
Great. Thanks for that, Jessica. Okay, so Sebastian has a question here, and he wants to know, can the Kananaskis River Dam stop peaking and have more consistent flows? This would create 40 kilometers of tremendous protected habitat for cutthroat and bull trout.
Thank you for the question, Sebastian. I'd like to address that. Kelly Williams. So dams are regulated under the Water Act, and they're administered by our Water Infrastructure Operations Division. Provincial fisheries biologists may be involved during the regulatory review process as subject matter experts, but we're not decision makers. When we develop local recovery plans, we do consider how dams influence populations and will set recovery objectives relative to being able to achieve success. All industrial activities and significant changes to footprint influence where we prioritize recovery actions. So I hope that helps answer your question relative to the dam on the Kananaskis. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Kelly. And we have 2 questions here that I'd like to group together and be answered all at once. So Sebastian, once again, we have back-to-back Sebastian questions here. Sebastian wants to know, are there any creeks that will be restocked with West Slope cutthroats using the new brood stock? And then Frank wants to know, are there any plans to improve the cutthroat sustainability on the Upper Sheep River to a point that it won't require periodic stocking?
Yeah, hi, Andrea here again. I'm going to take those questions. So first of all, are there any creeks that we will be restocking with West Slope cutthroat trout using this new broodstock? This is a stepwise process. We're actually trying to assess right now which streams would be possible and the best way forward, and under which methodologies we could use them. So Nicole already presented one of the methodologies. So we used a barren part of a stream and used the remote site incubation method to introduce fish in there as a trial period to see how the methodology works. The composite broodstock that you've heard about is a new kind of stock that we have in the system, and it will be ready to go in 2 to 3 years. So we have a little bit of time to exactly figure out where to use those stocks. So we're going, we're actually investing quite some work time at the moment into that and trying to figure out what would be the best way forward in that. And to answer Frank's question about the Sheep River in particular, I assume, Frank, you're referring to the stocking of the Upper Sheep River above the waterfalls that has been happening quite some years ago, several times with different kinds of trout, and none of them have ever taken and were sustainable in there. So don't really know what's happening in that stream, why the fish are not taken. It could just literally be that the habitat is not proper enough to sustain fish by themselves. So we would have to look into before we use the broodstock for that and see what we have to do in that system to use the broodstock.
Thank you, Andreas. Okay, we have a question coming in here from Frank, and Frank says, I realize that brown trout are not native to Alberta, but in central Alberta, there are a lot of brown trout waters that never seem to get any attention. Why not? And apologies, that was actually from Grant.
Thanks for that question, Grant. I'll answer that. So yeah, as you mentioned, brown trout are not native to Alberta. So we didn't cover them in our webinar today. We were really focusing on our native trout, our species at risk that are listed today. However, there is local biologists that work in central Alberta that could answer your questions about brown trout if you would like to get in contact with them. So I believe the contact information for Ask the Expert is still in the chat there, and you can submit your question there. They would be able to better answer that for you.
Okay, thanks for that, Nicole. And yeah, we'll make sure that that information is in the chat for folks. Okay, so Jesse wants to know what inputs and variables are input for the cumulative effects modeling.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for your question. Maybe I'll back up a little bit so everyone listening in kind of knows what we're talking about when we are discussing cumulative effects models. So we have developed a modeling approach in the province that helps us kind of disentangle some of the challenges of identifying which are the most important threats for a specific native trout population in a watershed. And right now, for example, in the bull trout cumulative effects model, we consider 16 different threats simultaneously. And we can run these models at different spatial scales, but generally we do it at like a watershed scale. And the 16 different threats, they really cover the full gamut between habitat, non-native trout issues, and other sources of mortality. So digging in a little bit deeper than those big categories, under the habitat, there would be increases in sedimentation, phosphorus, water temperature, changes to hydrologic flow regime. For non-native trout, it would be issues relating to competition and different species. So perhaps it's brown trout or lake trout or rainbow trout, and the list goes on, and hybridization as well. And then for direct sources of mortality, we consider things like entrainment and impingement in dams and other types of weir structures, overfishing, research mortality, and kind of the list goes on and on. We've really tried to cover all of the major threats for each of the 3 different species at risk that are often coming out as key drivers in some of the fundamental research projects that go on inside Alberta and outside Alberta, but also the key threats that our stakeholders have identified as serious issues as well. So this is a big topic, and I'm actually really excited that you asked the question tonight. I would encourage you, if you'd like to know more, to maybe we can get connected through our outreach services team. And again, I'd love to dig in if you have more specific questions around one of the inputs or how we even put the whole model together and how we're using it.
Thanks, Jessica. I think that's would be really interesting to dig deeper into. So it's nice to have a bit of an overview here tonight, and yeah, the offer to connect further as well. So thank you for that answer. Okay, so next, Grant has a question and is wondering if there's any place to see a listing of Watercourse Crossing reports. So folks will remember we talked a little bit, Nicole mentioned the Watercourse Crossing program during her presentation. So is there any place to see a listing of Watercourse Crossing reports?
Hi, Grant. I'd like to address that question for you. At this point in time, we're actually not aware of any location that publicly someone can go to get have a look at some of the Watercourse Crossing reports. However, if you do have a specific question or a specific area that you're interested in, you could potentially pop your question to Ask the Expert, and we could see if we can get some information for you. I do believe they have an intent on having some of those reports public, but I'm not sure timelines on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And maybe as well, this Grant might be able to reach out again to the outreach services team to get further information as well. Okay, so now we have a question here from Scott. So take me a moment to read. Are there any plans to revisit or action the Fisheries and Recreation Enhancement Working Group recommendations to adjust the current water management strategy for the Kananaskis River system, moving away from the current hydropeaking regime appears to have the potential to restore a large quantity of habitat that historically supported native trout species, specifically bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout, and may offer an opportunity for reintroduction of these species.
I will address this as well, Catherine. Thank you, Scott. I am unaware of what the Fisheries and Recreation Enhancement Working Group is. Likely that is something that the Infrastructure Operations Division was part of, and I'm also relatively new to the team. However, when we develop our local recovery plans, we try and understand how our dams will influence the population and consider that information in how we're setting recovery objectives. So some of these may have significant changes to footprint and how we can prioritize recovery actions, and some of these locations it may be okay. So that's kind of how we, on the Native Trout Recovery Program, are rolling that information in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. And next up, okay, we have a question here coming in from Pedro. And Pedro is curious about whirling disease, which I'm sure has been on people's minds over the past few years here. So Pedro wants to know, what is the current outlook on whirling disease in the Bow River and connected waters?
Hi, Andreas again. So thanks for asking that question, Pedro. Whirling disease is a key issue that Alberta takes very seriously in our populations of fish in the whole East Slopes. The Oldman River, Bow River, the North Saskatchewan and Red Deer River basins have been declared positive for whirling disease. And there may be effects on the fish population in those streams. We have a very in-depth study on the Crow's Nest River and a little bit on the Oldman. We have no current information on if whirling disease has been having a population level effect on the Bow River. Indications right now is that it hasn't. But we're monitoring the effect of whirling disease, and there's actually a student from the University of Alberta that is currently doing research on that specific as well. In general, we would always encourage any angler who is moving between watersheds in a very frequent manner to clean, drain, and dry in between, so that you don't transfer the parasite from one watershed to the other. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Andreas. And maybe we can also share the link to our website with all of that clean, drain, dry information too, so that folks can go and check that out. So next up, we've got a question here from Rod, and Rod is wondering, when you are removing culverts that were barriers to fish passage for many years, do you have issues with substrate aggregation upstream of the culvert and degradation downstream, and a time lag for substrate equilibrium reestablishment?
I'll take that one. Thanks, Rod, for that question. I will start off by saying that I'm not an engineer. I work on fish, and so the main focus we have is about fish passage. However, I know that we have a lot of great engineers that we work with, and our partners are working with, and so of our colleagues are working with, to ensure that the substrate is appropriate for fish passage and water flows. And usually when there's culvert replacements, there's a lot of fish habitat work being done at the same time, including riparian replacements and stuff, so that we ensure that the fish habitat is good and the substrate is suitable, and that it's really a nice reclaimed crossing. So that is the best answer I can give you right now. It doesn't have quite all the details. If you'd like to contact us or contact our outreach services, if you want more details on that, maybe we could find someone that could better give you those kind of details.
Thank you, Nicole. And I know that on that Watercourse Crossing program page too, there are a series of videos and things that might have, it just might be interesting to learn more about the program there too, if folks are interested. So we've got a question coming in here from Sebastian. And Sebastian says that other provinces have barbless and no trouble laws, though. And how do they have the authority and not Alberta? And that doesn't make sense.
Hi, Jess again. So it's my understanding the federal government provides authority down to different provinces and states to manage their fisheries via different legislative tools. And they really vary, again, between jurisdictions. So I'm not an expert on the exact systems and acts and laws that BC has in place. But I do know that right now, Alberta doesn't have that authority, but we are close to gaining it. And there may have been a little bit more information about this during our policy webinar that happened a couple of weeks ago, if you're interested in digging into this a little bit more.
Okay, thanks for that, Jess. Okay, we have a question here from Jesse. And Jesse wants to know, what are the survival success rates of the streamside incubators in comparison to survival rates of natural reds? This is a great science-based question for you folks.
I can take this one, Catherine. Thank you for the question, Jesse. My name is Ryan Beckler, and I'm the facility supervisor at the Allison Creek Brood Trout Station. So your question was the survival rate of RSIs. Certainly when we incubate the eggs to eyed stage at the hatchery, we can ensure there's no flooding risk, no other factors that can affect those eggs incubating if they were in the wild. So we can control that in a controlled setting in the hatchery, and it can be as high as 80%. So typically in the wild, Andreas might have to attest to this and add to that, but it's much lower. Great question, Andreas.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Yeah, no, you're bang on. So within the hatchery during the quarantine, there's barely any mortality at all. And then we monitor the outflow of those RSI units in the stream. Obviously, seen those orange buckets, and they have a spout at the end. So we actually don't capture what swims out of those spouts, but we count the dead eggs that we find, or non-hatched eggs that we find in the RSI unit at the time when all hatching is done. And we had upwards of above 80% success rate and swim up rate out of the incubation units into the natural environment in the last 3 years that we tried this, which gives us a pretty good hope. There's only rough assumptions of what we have in the natural environment, but in the natural environment, we assume about 20% of naturally incubated eggs would survive up to the swim up stage. So there's a potentially way higher success rate with the RSI units.
Okay, thanks, Andreas and Ryan. It's really interesting to hear those numbers and that information about the success rates. So we have another question here from Lori. And Lori is wondering if changes to amount and patterns of stream flow by people or climate are a threat to threatened trout, and if they are being considered as part of recovery planning.
Hi, Lori. Thanks for your question. I love these science questions, by the way. The simple answer is yes. So changes to stream flow, for whatever reason, can certainly be issues for native trout. And right now in that cumulative effects model that I was speaking to earlier, we do actually consider that as a threat. We work closely with some of our experts in hydrology and forest hydrologists to help us really understand what happens when we clear land, so changes in footprint, and the impacts on timing and frequency and intensity of floods on native trout. So we have a pretty good handle on considering that threat in kind of a current state snapshot. But in terms of the climate piece and how that might change, we are working right now, again, with some partners on developing improved climate models and understanding how climate change might impact native trout. So that's some exciting work that'll be coming. In terms of how we actually consider changes in stream flow during recovery planning, again, it's on a watershed by watershed case. So in some cases, the changes to stream flow just based on current footprint might be a real issue. And if it is, then it's kind of our job to go out and talk to some of the major industrial folks or municipalities in that watershed and come up with some solutions on how we can address that. Yeah, so hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, now this question kind of made me laugh here from Mark, just the start of it, that you may not be able to answer this, but we're going to try our best. So, but why does the provincial government not see your activities as a priority? It's disappointing that funding from DFO, which is the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, seems to be critical.
Thank you for the question, Mark. I'd love to answer that. So when we get funding from DFO, we're required to match it. So a one-to-one matching. So for every dollar DFO provides us for our programming, we have to contribute the same amount. And to date, we've been able to do that. So that's very exciting. You are right, though, that we would not be able to undertake the work that we do without the funding from DFO. And we also would not be able to do the work that we do without the collaboration that we have with our partners across the East Slope. So it's a whole group of people that really make this project successful. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Kelly. Okay, and Carl is wondering about riparian areas. And so Carl says, I have a question regarding riparian area protection of waterways such as streams, creeks, and rivers. Where is the thinking currently in Alberta? For example, Ontario is much more restrictive to protection from erosion, pollutants introduced by cattle, and their effects on waterways.
I can take this one, Catherine. Thanks for the question. So with regards to where Alberta's thinking is, so yeah, we value our riparian buffers as well. For the most part, a lot of the riparian buffers are within, I would say, forest management areas along these slopes. And these are typically identified in the forest management plans. So for example, there will be setbacks according to stream size, and each one of those you should be able to identify those in the operating ground rules. They're easily searchable online for all of the forest management area agreements. But also, so things like bull trout and like within the southern part of the province and Athabasca rainbow trout, we have also identified critical habitat for these species because they are federally listed. And part of that federal listing and critical habitat also has some protection or added protection as with riparian buffers. So just to give them that little bit of extra compared to, say, the non-threatened species. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, we have another question here coming in from Stephen. And Stephen has a question about the Snake River system of Idaho. So I recently came across a management strategy being implemented in the Snake River system of Idaho, where native Yellowstone cutthroat trout are competing against non-native rainbow trout. They have implemented a rainbow trout suppression program, which includes increased angler harvest of non-native rainbows. Any plans to include angler harvest as a management tool to suppress rainbow trout populations to protect and enhance West Slope cutthroat trout, for example, in the Old Man River watershed?
Hi, Stephen. Andrea here again. Thanks for that awesome question. I like that the people here that actually read more and more of these studies from out of province. It's really cool. So yeah, in the Snake River, they have the problem with Yellowstone cutthroat trout being the invasive, and they're trying to suppress they're trying to suppress rainbows to prevent the them from spreading into Yellowstone cutthroat trout habitat. Sorry. So this is basically as a recovery strategy. This is a physical removal by angling, and Alberta has actually done this before. So we've done this in Quirk Creek, where we've tried to get brook trout angled out of Quirk Creek to prevent them competing with the western cutthroat trout population in there, and to prevent hybridization with bull trout that are in there. There's actually a scientific study that has been published in a report that is available on the Alberta government webpage on that. And yeah, it is a methodology to use to suppress invasive species. So when we are thinking of removing fish, non-native fish from certain watersheds, this is certainly a methodology we would absolutely involve anglers in at one point to help us remove those non-native species.
I'm actually just going to add to your answer a little bit, Andreas. We actually recently attended a talk from the fisheries manager in Idaho, and talked about this project, which was actually really interesting to hear. And one thing that he talked about is that he was very clear is that they have a very different type of stream environment down there, and he called it a stream that is highly productive. And so even through high angling pressure and the suppression that they were doing, they didn't see effects to the native species there. Whereas, as Andreas mentioned, up here in our type of stream, our environment, we did see that at Quirk Creek. So it's very important that these studies are very context dependent, and we take that in mind when we're thinking about, you know, if their studies can apply to our streams. Something in Alberta that we have is that our streams are usually quite a bit colder where our native trout are, and also somewhat less productive. So it's it allows for us to use different methodologies than what's going on in Idaho. So this kind of idea of angler suppression might not be as applicable as it works for their Snake River. But anyways, just interesting that this is actually coming up, considering that it was just a few days ago we actually heard directly from this fisheries manager in Idaho about this project.
That sounds like perfect timing. So excited that you were able to participate in that conversation before this webinar, I guess, and share that information with everybody tonight. So thanks for that, Nicole, and Andreas for the background there. So we have another question here about bull trout, and this is coming in from Dean. And Dean wants to know, were bull trout observed in Radiant Creek prior to restoration efforts?
Hi, Dean. Jessica again. This is an easy answer. Yes, it was actually me out on Radiant Creek electrofishing, and I handled a couple bull trout out of there. An easy question. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So next up, we have a question here from, let's go to Frank. And Frank wants to know, what is the status of the remaining bull trout population on the Old Man River below the dam? Is there any consideration to other attempts to create a spawning, or sorry, excuse me, is there any consideration to another attempt to create a spawning channel as was previously attempted?
Hi, Frank. Thanks for that question. So, good question. There is a bull trout population below the Old Man River Dam down here in the south. That bull trout population stems from during the time that the Old Man Dam was implemented. Those fish were either coming over the dam or through the dam, or were actually still below the dam when the dam was built. For a while, there were recovery actions that were considered for the offsetting of that dam, and we were not quite sure if the fish would be actually viable below the dam or not. And in the last survey that we did, which is actually quite some years ago, we found quite some recruited fish. So we we are under the impression that there is a reproducing population of bull trout below the dam. And so we haven't done any additional recovery actions currently planned for that area, but we keep an eye on that population to make sure that it's doing well over time.
Thanks for that, Andreas. And I have to say, I'm loving all of these questions that are coming in. There's lots of really science-based questions being asked tonight here. So this is one here about the Athabasca River and Athabasca rainbows and graylings. So Amy wants to know, she says, I fish an easy to access tributary of the Athabasca River that has a good population of Athabasca rainbows and grayling. Why not make it catch and release? And sorry, I think that question didn't come in from Amy, it came in from Mark.
I can take this question, Catherine. Mike Blackburn here again out of Edson. For the most part, the area that I manage and I work in is the Athabasca River drainage in its entirety. And it's really cool to hear that you're finding Athabasca rainbows and grayling in an easy access tributary. As for catch and release, currently the Athabasca drainage and province-wide, or Athabasca drainage, rainbows are catch and release in the flowing water systems. And grayling province-wide are catch and release. With regards to the Athabasca rainbows, I'm curious as to if you ever want to talk about any of your fishing and where you're catching these. That would be super cool. Just because you're catching an Athabasca rainbow trout, or sorry, you're catching a rainbow trout in the Athabasca drainage, does not necessarily mean it's an Athabasca rainbow trout. Just for a heads up, we do have hybrids in the system, but if anyone's out there finding these nice little aggregates of rainbow trout in tributaries, I'd love to hear about them in Edson here. It's always helpful to find out where the distribution of these are. We are currently working on updating our DNA products, so we have a panel and get a better idea of what's out there with regards to pure Athabasca rainbows and what's not, to help further our recovery efforts with Athabasca rainbows. Thanks for the question, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. And okay, so now we're going to jump over to the real question from Amy here. So Amy says, thank you, Jess, for the answer to the climate effects impacts in the cumulative effects model. You mentioned working with partners on updating the climate models. What partners are you working with for this?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for your question. And boy, it's a long list of partners because the stream temperature and climate modeling piece, it's a lot of work to tackle over a big piece of the province. So I'll do my best listing all the partners, but please, if you are involved and I don't list you, please don't take offense. So our major partners are the Foothills Research Institute and Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Those are kind of like the two largest partners in terms of the climate modeling aspect. But then there are many other partners that are out on the landscape right now, helping us get a better understanding of stream temperature, which is important input into the climate modeling piece. And those partners would be like University of Calgary, Trout Unlimited, and different chapters of Trout Unlimited, some local fish and game clubs, watershed councils, and again, I'm sure I'm missing some important partners that are helping us collect stream temperature. Hopefully that helped.
Thank you, Jess. Okay, so and definitely that work with partners, of course, it's just critical. So we have a question coming in here from Derek, and Derek says, hello, I'm in the south along the Milk River, and I remember just the past year when the river ran dry due to infrastructure failure. Will there be any restocking of this system? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. A little bit out of my wheelhouse because there's not native trout in that system, you know, when we're talking about Athabasca rainbow, West Slope, or bull trout. However, I do have a lot of colleagues that are working on listed species. So we have stonecat, western silvery minnow, and Rocky Mountain sculpin that are listed as threatened in that system. And I know there was a lot of concern about what the failure of that infrastructure did when it had that major impact on flows there. However, there has been continued monitoring with some of our DFO colleagues and some of our regional colleagues down there, and they were still able to find natural populations of species within that system. And so we definitely would not want to stock over our natural populations there while they're still there successful, especially with these other species at risk that are there. Yeah, maybe they're not necessarily sport fish species, but they are our natural species that are living in the Milk River there. And if they're still able to exist there, then we'll just leave them to keep going. So we're no plans of stocking there.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, we have a question here from Zahara, and Zahara is wondering, is there any plan to monitor the bull trout on the Peace River?
I can take this one, Catherine. Thanks for the question. Mike Blackburn here again out of Edson. Although the Peace River isn't in my immediate area, I do work with a group of biologists in the northwest of Alberta. So I have a pretty good idea of what the work plan could be and will be in the next near future here. And far as I know, there will be no monitoring work throughout by the government in the Peace River in the next year. However, if you want to get any specifics on the Peace River or any of the management plans in that area, we do have an office in Peace River, and I urge you to contact the biologist in Peace River.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so I think that we have time for just one last question here tonight. So Oliver is wondering, is there any collaboration between yourselves and the people in Banff National Park working on similar efforts?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Oliver. Yeah, it's a great question. We know that the groups, the fishery biologists in Banff are doing really great work. That's something that we've been hearing a lot about, and we're definitely following closely on their fish recovery efforts. And we actually work quite closely with them. It's something that, we're all working together to do native trout recovery. They've been really great and doing some very interesting methods for non-native removal using rotenone and then restoring the native West Slope cutthroat trout there. They're also doing a lot of recovery efforts in the Cascade system, which has been really interesting. So they're doing really exciting stuff. We really work together to have understand kind of the lessons that they are learning when they're working through their projects, and similarly share our recovery efforts with them. And that's just on the ground scale. We also work with them a lot in some of our recovery planning efforts and sharing research as well. And we also share people back and forth when we have projects that we need extra help on. We borrow some of their staff. We send some of our staff over there. I was lucky enough to actually work on one of their projects up in Lake Louise a couple of years ago. So yeah, we're very connected for sure. And it's been really great on all parts for us to have that connection.
I'd like to just add that collaboration between Alberta and Jasper Park is very similar to what you see in Banff. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both Nicole and Mike, for that information. And so with that, we are at the end of our question and answer period. But if you did not have an opportunity to have your question answered here live with us tonight, don't worry, there is still opportunity for you to send in those questions to our expert panel. So you can do that by by finding the Ask the Expert on our engagement page, and that Ask the Expert will be open until February 9th. You can also fill out our survey, which is on the sport fishing regulations. So that survey closes again on February 9th at midnight. So you can, oh, sorry, not midnight. It actually closes at noon. So make sure that you check out that engagement page there. You can also connect with us in person. So we are going to be at a series of different trade shows over the coming months here. So this weekend, actually, we are at the Calgary Boat and Outdoors Show. And that's February 10th until the 12th. And then we are going to be over in Red Deer at the Red Deer Outdoor and Adventure Show, and then back in Calgary at the Outdoor Adventure and Travel Show, and then up in Edmonton. So lots of different trade shows happening, and be sure that you can connect with us in person at those. I also wanted to mention Family Fishing Weekend. So Family Fishing Weekend is happening February 18th until the 20th. And this is an opportunity for you to introduce people to fishing who might not have fished before. So on Family Fishing Weekend, you don't need a license to fish. All of the regulations do still apply, but it's a great way to connect people with this great sport. Finally, I wanted to invite everybody to follow us on Facebook. So our Facebook page is My Wild Alberta, and you can also visit us online at alberta.ca or mywildalberta.com. One last request for folks is to provide us with feedback on tonight's session in the webinar survey. So this survey will pop up once we close the session here, and it really helps us just to see how we're doing with these webinars and make any improvements that folks suggest. So thanks everybody again for being here tonight. Really appreciate it, and be sure to check out those other webinar recordings if you weren't able to attend live with us over the past few weeks. And I hope that everybody enjoys the rest of their evening. And with that, we'll bring the session to a close.